He looked her up and down, then spoke 3 words that could break a woman's hope. "You're too small." No handshake, no apology, just the sound of boots turning away, and the station dust clinging to Catherine's skirt like even the land itself had no place for her. She'd left Savannah with nothing left to return to. Her mother gone, her boarding room taken, and one letter from a widowed rancher out west was the last piece of hope she dared to hold. She thought maybe, just maybe, there'd be a roof waiting in this strange land. But in a single sentence, she became unwanted all over again. Under a Wyoming sky too vast for mercy, she stood alone on the cracked platform of Dust Ridge Station, her boots dusted with red grit, a mail-order bride's letter crumpled against her heart. She'd crossed half a continent for a stranger's blunt promise, a farmer named Emery Roan seeking a wife to keep his house, not his heart. But with one glance, he deemed her too slight for the land's brutal demands, and turned away, vanishing into the saloon's shadow. Leaving her stranded amid swirling sand and a silence heavier than the train's fading rumble. No one met her eyes. No one offered a hand. She is Catherine Marlowe, a 38-year-old seamstress, her hands steady with a needle but worn by loss. In Savannah, that winter brought no snow, only a chill that slipped through wooden window frames and damp stains creeping across the boarding house ceiling. Catherine Marlowe sat by the window, her needle gliding through the frayed cuff of her own sleeve. The stitches were even, tight, precise, as her mother had taught her, but no one was left to wear the mended coat. Her mother had passed last summer, and this room, with a debt notice pinned behind the door, would no longer be hers by next week. A letter lay quiet on the table, yellowed paper, ink smudged as if caught in rain. No love letter, no greeting, no warmth. Just a few curt lines from a man named Emery Roan, a widowed farmer from Wyoming. "I need a wife to keep house, cook, draw water. No need for beauty, no need for wit, just strong and quiet. If you agree, I'll send train fare." Nothing in the letter stirred the heart. But that was why Catherine trusted it. An empty promise sometimes felt truer than honeyed words that never held. She had little to pack: an old canvas bag, her mother's oak sewing kit, 3 plain dresses, and an unfinished embroidered shawl. Before the letter arrived, Catherine had spent her days in a Savannah seamstress shop, threading needles under flickering oil lamps while customers whispered of the West. Tales of gold, land, and men seeking wives through letters. Mrs. Hargrove, the shop's owner, had warned her, "Those letters promise much, but deliver dust." Yet the weight of unpaid rent and the landlord's daily knocks, Mr. Ellison, a wiry man who pitied her but never forgave a debt, pushed her toward the unknown. She remembered her mother's hands, guiding hers over a torn apron years ago. "Stitch tight, Kathy," she'd said, voice soft as dusk. "Life tears easy, but a good seam holds." That memory clung to her as she packed, the oak sewing kit her only tether to a past now gone. The train journey stretched 3 weeks. Through each station, through shifting shades of earth, she sat by the window, not journaling, not dreaming. Her hope wasn't a blazing fire, it was an ember in the dark. Small, smoldering, enough to warm one soul. Fellow passengers didn't ask her name. They guessed widow, governess, or housemaid. She didn't correct them. No need. As the air grew sharp and carried the scent of parched soil, Catherine knew she was nearing the place, the source of the letter. At Dust Ridge, the morning sky loomed higher than usual, thin and laced with fine red sand. The station was a weathered board sign, its letters faded, and a tired porter sweeping last night's ash from a stove. Catherine stepped onto the platform, her soles sinking lightly into cracked, russet earth. The letter, folded one last time, rested in her coat pocket near her heart. She carried no photograph, knew nothing of the man who'd summoned her with a few lines. But she hadn't come for him. She'd come because she had nowhere else to go. In the wide land under a too bright sky, Catherine waited. Dressed straight, hands steady, eyes unexpecting. Only fine sand swirled in gusts, a warning from the land itself. Here, no one holds another unless they can stand alone. From Savannah's crowded boarding houses, where creditors knocked daily and neighbors whispered of her mother's debts, to Dust Ridge's sparse frontier, where the saloon's clamor and the church's Sunday hymns clashed like rival winds, she stood at a crossroads. A door creaked open from the saloon behind the station. A figure emerged. She guessed, or hoped, it was him. No one had told her. This letter wasn't an invitation. It was a test. And in Dust Ridge, not everyone was deemed enough to stay. Dust Ridge didn't look like the kind of place where dreams ended, but it had a way of doing so quietly. The train shrieked once, then pulled away in a trail of smoke and grit. Dust Ridge's train station had no ticket clerk, no peddler's call, no passengers but Catherine Marlowe, standing tall in a faded wool dress, clutching her canvas bag, the western sun stinging her neck like an unanswered question. Red grit hung in the air like ash that wouldn't settle, coating the wooden bench, the peeling signpost, and the last of Catherine's illusions. Her old boots sank lightly into the cracked earth, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered, would these heels leave a mark, or would the dry haze sweep them away as she turned? She'd come here because of a letter, a brief, blunt reply to an ad she'd placed after her mother died, and her room was let to another. Emery Roan, widower, age 42, needed a wife. She'd folded the letter into her apron and reread it each night. Not because it was kind, but because it was real. So she came. Emery Roan emerged from the saloon nearby, not the man she'd faintly pictured from his letter. Tall, bony, sun-darkened, his narrow eyes held no surprise, as if he'd seen too much to care. A tin cup, stained with whiskey, dangled in his hand, and he spat as he walked, as if cursing the land he lived on. Catherine stood straighter, chin slightly raised, not in pride, but to guard what little she had left. His hat was pulled low, casting a line of shadow over eyes that had once known wonder, but had long since learned to ignore it. He didn't speak when he stopped before her, just looked, first at her boots, then her shoulders, then her hands. His eyes weren't cruel, just tired, exhausted in a way no rest could fix. "You're from Savannah?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, Catherine Marlowe." Her voice held a steadiness she didn't feel. He squinted as if her name was longer than necessary. Then came a pause, thick, dry as the air between them. And then 3 words. "You're too small." That was it. No hello, no handshake, no apology. Just a statement, dropped like a stone into the quiet. Catherine stood frozen, lips slightly parted, but nothing rose. He turned away. Just like that, boots dragging again, the tin flask at his hip clinking once. She didn't chase, didn't move. But her breath caught in her throat, something sharp and stinging, not because of what he'd said, but because of what she'd hoped he might. The wind picked up, brushing her skirt like fingers trying to pull her backward. And just as she bent to lift her bag, she heard his footsteps return, slow, reluctant, as if even he didn't know why he'd turned around. He stopped a few paces away, cleared his throat roughly, and didn't look at her when he spoke. 2 winters ago, my wife, Eliza, she died hauling water from the well during a storm. We were out of firewood. I was fixing the roof. Didn't notice. She'd gone. Found her in the morning, still holding the rope. His voice didn't tremble, but it wore through itself like bark scraped too many times. She was delicate, like you. Thought she'd be strong enough. She wasn't. He didn't say her name again. Didn't need to. So no, it ain't fair what I said. But I can't watch someone die just trying to keep up with this land. Then he looked at her, finally. Not with disdain, with a man's understanding of pain that once came with love, and now only came with memory. You'll find a better place than this, he said, and someone who sees more than work in you. Then he tipped his hat. Not out of courtesy, but closure. Catherine didn't follow, didn't call out. She stood, boots caked in red grit, heart steady, face unchanged. Only something slipped away in her chest, like the last trickle drying at a well's bottom. The dry haze rose, steady and soft, dusting her coat, her bonnet, and the memory of the train that had just left. In Dust Ridge, where miners bartered gold dust for whiskey and preachers vied for souls in a clapboard church, Emery had his own reasons. The land demanded strength he couldn't lose again, not for love, but for survival. The long bench at the station had no backrest. Catherine sat still, hands on her knees, heels touching the ground. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Now and then, a horse whinnied from a distant stable, its echo threading through sparse trees. No one came. No one asked. Across the road stood a simple wooden fence, splitting the station from a grazing lot. Old posts slanted in rocky soil, barbed wire sagging like unanswered questions. A sudden gust swept through, rattling the loose wire and toppling another post already weakened from the week's earlier storm. Jonas Whitaker stood beyond it, not hiding, not approaching. He stood as if part of the fence itself, still, unintrusive, present. In his hands were a shovel and a coil of wire. He'd meant to mend the broken section, a task born of habit in a town where Dust Ridge's miners and ranchers cared more for saloon bets than shared boundaries. But then he saw her, the woman who'd sat there from afternoon till dusk, swallowed the platform. She didn't weep, didn't clutch her head, just sat, quiet as the earth, as if she were the remnant of a fire that refused to collapse. Jonas wasn't one to meddle. The town knew that. He'd come to Dust Ridge after the war, no family, no explanations. Bought a barren plot, built a small cabin by a dry creek. He didn't drink, didn't laugh loud, and no one had ever seen him ask about anything beyond salt or nails at the general store. But that night, something about her, maybe the way she needed no pity, yet pushed no one away, drew his voice. It was low, undemanding, like a breeze brushing an open door. I've got a spare cabin by the creek. If you need shelter, it's empty. Catherine looked up, unshaken. Their eyes met across the fence. Not a greeting, not a judgment, just an acknowledgement that one saw the other, not out of pity, not desire, but as if her presence fit some unnamed gap. You run a boarding house? She asked, voice faintly hoarse. Number Wine live half a mile off. That cabin was my brother's, but no one uses it now. You can stay if you want. Charity. Number I don't like folks coming near me out of obligation. She stood, slowly brushing red grit from her skirt. No time needed to think. When rejection becomes familiar, you learn to trust instinct, not because it's always right, but because it's what's left when every door shuts. "All right," she said. Jonas didn't add more. He turned, walked slowly, letting her follow. They spoke nothing on the way. Gusts kicked up now and then, and Jonas glanced sideways to ensure she didn't fall behind. But he didn't ask if she was tired, didn't offer to carry her bag. He knew some people need their hands busy to keep from feeling empty. The path cut through a parched field, then crossed a shallow creek bed. The night was calm, only the crunch of stones under boots and the creak of horse tack as Jonas adjusted the saddle. The cabin appeared beyond, young pines, small slanted roof, rough wooden walls, door unlocked, as if nothing inside was worth guarding. But Catherine saw the porch steps freshly swept, new mud scraped off with a pine branch, and the hearth's ash still warm. Jonas opened the door. No lamp, no ceremony. "You can start a fire. Wood's in the corner. If you need anything, I'll come back at dawn." She stepped in, no thanks. He didn't expect it. Before he left, Catherine glanced over her shoulder. "Someone lived here before?" Jonas nodded. "My brother. He left last year. Didn't take anything but left the roof." She didn't ask where. He didn't explain. The door closed without a sound. A breeze swept over the roof. Catherine stood in the empty room, where the scent of old wood and faint smoke mixed like an unwritten song. No one saved her from her old life. No one promised a new one. Just a roof, and a man who didn't ask what she'd been through. And maybe that was what made her begin to feel she still existed. The cabin rested quiet at the forest's edge, where the airflow shifted thrice daily and woodpeckers ignored human sounds. Its wooden walls cracked with time, the roof slanting toward a small creek that murmured ceaselessly, as if water never tired. Catherine untied her bag, folded her few dresses, set her mother's oak sewing kit on a weathered shelf, and stood gazing at the empty room. A canvas stretched, awaiting its first stitch. No soft bed, just a pile of straw, a few wool blankets, and a warped floor. But no one chased her out. No one set terms. She began with small things, mending a torn curtain, relining a kitchen cloth, clearing old ash from the hearth, and boiling water. For the first time in months, her hands worked for something that wasn't someone else's. Jonas didn't come daily, but his traces were everywhere. A sack of salt left at the door, wrapped in old cloth. No note. A bundle of firewood stacked neatly, as if by someone who'd patrolled rainy nights. A bag of grain hung on the latch, with a handful of sun-dried beans. And once, at week's end, a clutch of wildflowers, purple and white, not in a vase, just laid on the step, as if someone had meant to knock, then thought better. Catherine didn't ask. Jonas didn't explain. That was their unspoken rule. Two people asked too much and understood too little. One morning, Jonas came early, holding a thick sweater, torn at the elbow, stitching loose at the armpit. He stood at the door, not knocking, leaning just enough to keep the light from flooding the small room. "This sweater. I meant to keep it, but it's fraying." Catherine took it, fingers brushing the worn edge. "It can be mended," she said. Nothing more. Jonas nodded, turned to leave, then paused as if recalling something. "You make everything around here come alive again?" Not praise, not a lover's gaze, just a truth, spoken as if he'd just noticed the trees behind the cabin budding, and no one had replanted them. She was simply there. Catherine looked at him. No smile, but in her chest, something softened, like dry earth after a light spring rain. After that, she sewed more. A tablecloth from old fabric, pillowcases from grain sacks, hand-stitched seams neat, not for applause, but to make the place feel human. The hearth grew warmer, the table less bare. Sometimes she sewed while Jonas sat on the porch, carving a wood scrap into a spoon. They said nothing, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, as if something was being built between them, quietly, from things neither demanded nor owed. One evening, as firelight cast shadows on the wall, Catherine worked on the sweater. A gust from the hills shook the roof, and as she reached to secure a loose shingle, her foot slipped on the ladder. Her hand caught the edge, but the shingle fell, clattering against the porch. Jonas was there in an instant, steadying the ladder, his grip firm but brief. No words, just a nod. As if they'd agreed long ago to catch each other without making a fuss. She looked at the stitches joining sleeve to body, tidy, strong, and thought, maybe people are like this too. Not needing to be new, just needing someone patient to sew them right. And maybe this cabin, amid stones and mountain air, wasn't a place to live forever. But it was a place where silence didn't mean being forgotten. The tempest shifted in the third week, not the skies, but the towns. Rumors need no spark. Just a well-timed breath, a sidelong glance, and a pause long enough for folks to weave what never was. A woman living in the old Whitaker cabin. A man who lived alone, now rarely seen at the market. A seamstress who came by letter, unclaimed, unwed, and a man who corrected nothing. That was enough for rumors to bloom. Thorny, quick, needing no fertile ground. On Thursday morning, 4 women from Dust Ridge's Women's League appeared on the trail to the cabin. They wore dark ribboned dresses, straw hats adorned with feathers. One carried a basket of bread, another a Bible. All shared the same look, the certainty of a sacred mission to save someone from a wrong they hadn't tried to understand. Grace Whitley spoke first, her voice high as the church bell that rang each Sunday, drawing miners and ranchers from Dust Ridge's dusty market stalls to pews polished by habit. "We're just visiting." "Folks talk about you," the second added, chin tilted, scanning the cabin for signs of sin. "Your situation, your choice to stay." "There's a poorhouse in Cheyenne," said the third. "Better for a woman alone. Rules, shelter. No one misunderstands you there." "Or," the fourth smiled thinly, "go back east. Right to your old church. Someone will send a ticket." Grace, the eldest, had her own reasons. Her sister had once left for a mail-order marriage, only to return broken, shunned by the town for failing to fit. Grace believed order kept Dust Ridge whole. Strangers like Catherine threatened that. Catherine nodded lightly, no argument, holding a half-stitched kitchen cloth. A sudden gale howled, rattling the cabin's shutters, scattering leaves across the porch. The women clutched their hats, their words cut short. Then the back door swung open. Jonas Whitaker stepped from the shadows, sawdust on his hands, shirt half-buttoned. He didn't growl, didn't accuse. Just stood, spine straight, gray eyes meeting each woman's. Not threatening, but like a man watching a sandstorm dust his garden. "She's decent," he said, voice slow, no need for emphasis. "And I see no shame in sharing a roof with someone who doesn't lie." A silence fell, not because they were convinced, but because truth like that left no room for reply. Jonas tilted his head, ending the talk. The 4 left, their dresses flapping like sails turning before a storm. That night, the tempest grew fiercer. Rain pounded the roof, the leak spreading. Catherine and Jonas worked side by side, patching the hole with a tarp and spare wood. Her hands trembled from the cold, but she didn't stop. When the roof held, they sat by the hearth, catching their breath. Catherine poured water, her fingers brushing the kettle. "My mother used to say storms show what holds," she said, voice soft. She'd mend clothes during rain, said it kept her steady. Jonas looked at the fire. "My brother loved storms, said they cleared the air. He'd sit outside, even in the worst of 'em, till he caught fever and left." They didn't say more, but the shared words, small as they were, felt like stones laid for a path not yet finished. Later, as the rain eased, Jonas spoke again, not looking at her. "If I built you a real house, not this patched-up cabin, but a place with a proper stove, windows, a roof for 3 rainy seasons. If I did that, every log, every mortar line, start to finish, would you stay?" Catherine looked up. His eyes didn't plead, didn't dream. Just a man before a door he didn't want closed, but wouldn't open uninvited. "You asking because you're scared I'll leave, or because you want me to stay?" Jonas, slowly. "Both." Catherine didn't answer right away. In Dustridge, where the market hummed with traders' shouts and the church's hymns drowned out doubts, she'd felt eyes on her, judging, weighing. But here, with Jonas, she wasn't measured. For the first time, someone didn't offer marriage, didn't demand love, didn't claim her, just asked, would she stay if a place was truly hers? And that was something even her mother, with all her love, had never thought to ask. Jonas began building the new house on a morning when mist still clung to the grass, and the sky was the color of unburnished tin. He didn't announce it, just arrived with a coil of rope, his father's axe, and a stack of green-cut timber that still bled sap. By the time Catherine stepped outside with her hair half-pinned and a fresh towel still warm in her hands, he'd already split the first log with 3 clean strikes. "Eastern side's been sagging," he muttered, barely louder than the breeze. "Meant to fix it last spring." He didn't say it was for her, and she didn't ask. But there was something in the way he angled his body toward the land, as if shaping it might hush the ache of memory, that made her hands itch to be useful. The new house stood a few hundred paces behind the old cabin, near a weathered oak whose limbs stretched wide like the arms of a sentinel. No blueprint, no sketch on paper. Jonas worked from the map inside his bones. Each day he dug, hammered, and lifted, as if his muscles remembered what grief had once silenced. Catherine noticed the way his hands lingered on old wood, like the worn threshold he insisted on salvaging, or the iron hooks he kept from the ruined barn. Some things he couldn't throw away, not because they were useful, but because they held breath prints from a life that once was. She never asked about the woman who'd once stitched seams in that house, whose apron might have brushed the same doorway. But Catherine saw her in shadows, in the rocking chair missing one leg, now sanded and set under the porch awning, in the broken-handled mug Jonas used to hold nails, in the faded blue curtain she found folded in the rafters, stitched with a looped J in the corner. And still, Catherine stayed. Not to replace, but to rebuild. She patched chinks in the walls with straw and clay, fingers raw by nightfall. She gathered moss to line window gaps. She scrubbed soot from old lanterns until they glowed amber again. And when the wind brought in pine needles, she swept them into tidy piles with a makeshift broom. Not because anyone told her to, but because every small act made the house breathe easier. Some days, their rhythm was near wordless, Catherine kneeling to sort floorboards while Jonas adjusted rafters above. When their hands brushed, they didn't flinch. They simply paused. Just enough for silence to feel like understanding. There was a night when rain sliced the roof like tiny arrows. They hadn't yet sealed the last beam, and Catherine stood on a stool, holding tar cloth against the leak. Jonas climbed up beside her, wet to the bone, his coat flapping in the wind. Their arms touched, slick with rain. Catherine didn't step away. Neither did he. And as the thunder rolled through Dust Ridge, neither of them noticed. They only held that tarp together, against the storm, against the world. Later, Catherine made tea from wild mint and placed a cracked cup in front of Jonas. He didn't say thank you. But he drank it slowly, cradling the warmth like something rare. One evening, he handed her a spoon carved from cedar, its handle curved and etched with the shape of a requat flower, common in this part of the woods. "I saw it bloom near the stream," he said. "Thought of you?" Catherine held it as if it might break. "Why?" Jonas shrugged, his eyes on the fire. "Grows quiet, but strong. No one ever planted it. It just found a place." She traced the edge with her thumb, her chest tight in a way she couldn't name. She had never been compared to anything alive before. Certainly not something that belonged. As the weeks passed, their work began to look like a home. Catherine hemmed old curtains and stitched patches from Jonas's threadbare shirts to make a quilt. The hearth took shape, layered stone by stone, each one placed with a kind of reverence. Jonas crafted the door from hickory, its grain still etched with wind scars. He never touched her hand, never made promises. But one morning, she found a new pair of leather gloves resting on her work table, small enough for her fingers, lined with wool. No note. Later that week, as she swept the new floorboards, she found a paper tucked beneath a tin box, a deed, folded once, the name on it, hers. She walked to where Jonas was bent over the garden plot, pressing soil around the first sprout of cabbage. "You put it in my name." He didn't look up. Didn't seem right to build something without letting it belong to the one who filled it. Catherine blinked. "But why me?" He stood slowly, brushing dust from his hands, then met her gaze. Not softly, not dramatically, just plainly, truthfully. "You're the only person who never asked me to forget." That night she unfolded an old tablecloth, once belonging to Jonas's mother, and laid it across the new dining table. On it, she placed the lavender he'd once left on her step, now dried and tied with a ribbon. The spoon lay beside it, and the gloves he gave her, worn but warm, hung on the peg near the fire. The house wasn't finished, but it was already inhabited, not by ghosts, but by presence, by two people who never rushed, never declared, but stayed. Stayed long enough for trust to grow roots, for grief to soften, for love to find them quietly, like rain soaking into earth no one believed could bloom again. And in that house, half built, half memory, there was no room for empty declarations, only for acts that spoke louder than vows, and eyes that lingered just a little longer than politeness required. The days that followed were neither remarkable nor loud, but they held the kind of peace that only comes after long storms. The kind you don't trust at first, because quiet can feel like a trick. But slowly, they leaned into it, into each other. Catherine started each morning by unbarring the shutters, letting in soft light that danced along the wooden floorboards. Her footsteps made no echo in this house. It didn't need to be filled. It was already full. She rearranged the pantry shelves with a care born not of neatness, but reverence. Dried beans in old jars, bundles of thyme tied with string, and a tin of tea from her mother's wedding trunk, brought from a life long folded away. She placed it behind the flour sack, where she could forget it, and then remember again on quiet days. Jonas, in his way, moved like the structure itself, solid, reliable, never rushed. He built a trellis along the southern wall with leftover pine strips and a single rusted hinge. Catherine planted climbing peas and runner beans beneath it, whispering her hopes into the soil. They didn't call it their garden, but they planted it like people who planned to stay. In the evenings, Jonas came in with sawdust in his hair and resin on his sleeves. He never spoke first, but always noticed what she'd changed. A bowl moved, a corner swept, a dried wreath now hanging on the back door, made from wheat she'd gathered the day they finished the roof. He'd look, nod slightly, then find a reason to linger near it. Sometimes he'd bring things she didn't ask for, a tin cup with no handle, still polished, a bundle of feathers she might use for threading, a stack of papers, blank on one side, that he'd found in an old mining ledger. He didn't explain. She didn't need him to. One night, as Catherine folded linens by the window, Jonas entered holding a small carved object. He said nothing at first, just handed it to her like it was a secret he couldn't carry any longer. It was a wooden horse, unfinished, one leg missing, but smooth and warm from his palm. The kind a child might once have gripped in sleep. "Made it a long time ago," he said quietly. "Didn't finish it." Catherine turned it over in her hand, her thumb tracing the curve of the neck. "You kept it," she whispered. Jonas shrugged. Some things stay even when they shouldn't. She didn't ask who it was for. She placed it on the windowsill beside a cracked porcelain cup that had once been hers. Two broken things, both deserving of light. That summer, they began to cook together, awkwardly at first, as if sharing a stove was more intimate than sharing a bed. Catherine moved with quiet precision. Jonas was more instinct than recipe. But it worked. He'd slice while she stirred, pass her flour before she asked, and once even remembered she liked honey in her cornbread. Their first real meal in the finished house was not fancy, just lentil stew and sourdough she'd baked with, trembling hands. But when Jonas took his second helping, she smiled for the first time without checking if it was safe to. Later that week, they sanded and painted the porch together. Catherine chose a soft gray blue, the color of creek water in spring. Jonas didn't comment, just painted around her feet when she paused too long. When she stepped away, she found her footprints had dried into the boards. Jonas looked up, amused. "Guess we're here for good." And she didn't correct him. On Sundays, when the rest of the county rode to church or stayed in bed, they walked along the ridge above their land. Not talking much, just walking. Jonas would sometimes pick up stones, hold them to the light and toss them aside. One day Catherine stopped and picked one up, a small, rounded one with a seam of quartz. She tucked it into her apron. "For what?" Jonas asked. She smiled. "For the mantle." And soon, the stone joined the others. Pine cones, feathers, dried herbs, a small brass key with no door, all resting above the hearth like a collection of memory's bones. They didn't try to explain it. They were building a life out of pieces others had thrown away. Autumn came slower in that part of the valley, the trees reluctant to turn, the air soft until it suddenly wasn't. Catherine hung thicker curtains. Jonas split more wood, and together they built shutters for the windows, not because they feared storms, but because they wanted to be warm when they came. One night, after supper, they sat beside the fire, each with their own silence. Catherine was mending socks. Jonas was whittling. Without looking up, he said, I used to think I was better alone. Catherine didn't speak. I thought peace meant quiet, empty rooms, empty plates, nothing to break. He paused, turning the wood in his hand. But you make quiet feel like presence, like something is here, even when you're not saying a word. Catherine's needle froze. I don't need more words, she said. I just need to not feel like I disappear when the door closes. He looked at her then, not surprised, but changed. You never disappear. They went to bed early that night, but neither of them slept fast. The wind picked up, and a branch scraped the side of the house. Jonas shifted. Catherine reached across the quilts, found his hand. He squeezed once, then again. And she knew. The house was not just theirs. It was them. By winter, the front room had a handmade bookshelf, half filled with borrowed volumes from the widow on the ridge. Bibles, seed catalogs, poetry with corners folded. Catherine labeled each with scraps of paper, her cursive small but steady. Jonas carved her a coat hook from an antler he found buried in the snow, and when the first frost came, she made him a scarf. Not perfect, but thick and warm. He wore it like it had always been his. That December, a note arrived by Ryder. One of Jonas's cousins in town had died, and the family asked him to attend the burial. It was 2 days' ride and 3 days back. Catherine packed him bread and salt pork and placed a note in his saddlebag without signing her name. Just a pressed sprig of lavender. He left before dawn. She stood in the doorway long after the horse's hooves faded. Those 5 days alone were harder than any she'd known before. Not because she feared being alone, but because for the first time in her life, someone was coming back. When Jonas returned, cold and tired, he found the table set, the fire stoked, and a single candle flickering beside the quilt she'd made. He removed his coat, set it carefully on the peg, and when he turned, Catherine was there, quiet, steady. I miss the sound of your boots, she said. And Jonas, who had never been a man of grand gestures, simply stepped forward and pressed his forehead to hers. I thought about this place every mile. And Catherine, who had never known what it was to be waited for, closed her eyes. The wind rattled outside, but the hearth behind them burned steady. It was just a house, but it had been built by 2 hands, 2 hearts, and something stronger than vows. A willingness to stay. If this story touched something quiet in you, we'd be honored if you gave it a like. Subscribe to Wild West Love Echoes for more tales born of dust, silence, and love that lingers. And left a comment sharing what part of this story stayed with you. Every word you write helps the echoes travel farther.